Hey guys, it's Professor Tucker, and I apologize for posting Chapter 3 so late. This is the Chapter 3 Connecting Self and Communication from the book. I obviously had the flu last week, and I got so bad that I was just unable to talk for much of the week, much less kind of film a video. So this is being filmed actually on Super Bowl Sunday, so go Ravens, whoop whoop. If you like the 49ers, that's cool too. Whoever wins, that's fine. But I will post this tonight, and then tomorrow in class we will talk about a few things mentioned in the chapter, as well as the assignment that we were given for Chapter 2. So we still will kind of pull everything together with Chapters 4 and 5 that we talk about tomorrow in class. That way you're not missing anything. So I am going to refer to the PowerPoint notes just like I did for the last chapter. So you feel free to follow along if you'd like. The second slide is kind of an activity. This is the Who Am I list of 1 through 15 things about yourself. We will do this in class tomorrow. If you want to start on it right now, you are certainly welcome to. Basically, I'll ask you to kind of write up 15 things that describe who you are as an individual. And this can be very easy for some people and very difficult for others. So we'll talk about kind of the descriptions that you use and whether or not these are really accurate interpretations of yourself and how these would possibly change after taking the class. So the first part of the chapter is understanding a bit more about you, about who you are. And basically we're going to identify a few different things. The 3 main dimensions of the self. So the self-concept, self-image, and self-esteem. You will hear these terms, throughout the semester, so be sure that you know the differences between them and maybe would be able to apply that to a test. Just saying. Next is the notion of communication apprehension, and then self-fulfilling prophecy and impression management. Again, you'll have to know these things. And the effects of culture and gender on the self, because those are obviously big influencers in your life. So the first is the self-concept, knowing what your self-concept is and kind of how it gets put together. This is your perceived self. This is kind of how you see yourself. It's an organized collection of your own beliefs and your attitudes about you. So there are 2 subcomponents of this, your self-image and your self-esteem. So these 3 things are all interlinked, but they're not the same term. They're not to be used interchangeably. They are different. So your self-concept as a whole is made up of your self-image and your self-esteem. So your self-image is the mental picture that you actually have of yourself. Your self-esteem is your feelings and attitudes that you have towards yourself. So you put all those things together and you create your overall self-concept. So this can be physical attributes, your intellect, kind of your creativity, your ambitions, kind of how you feel about yourself in general. This does change from day to day. Some days we have really good self-esteem days, you feel pretty good about yourself, or your self-image, you think, oh, I look nice today. Other days are going to be the exact opposite of this. However, overall, you can kind of get a broad idea of what your self-concept really is.
We break down self-concept into the notion of attitudes, beliefs, and values. And this kind of gives a good indication of how this works. And yes, attitudes is spelled wrong. I actually copy and pasted this from the book. So, blame the publisher. But think of this kind of like an onion. If any of you have seen the original Shrek movie, Shrek is described as kind of an onion. Ogres have layers, and we do too. It works out really well. So on your outer layer is kind of your attitudes and your behaviors. This is a learned predisposition. This is how you respond to something in a favorable or unfavorable way. So your likes and your dislikes. It can be as basic as like, oh, I'm really into this band right now, or oh, I really don't like Kesha. Sorry. Your beliefs go a little bit deeper into the core of who you are. Your beliefs can be religious, they can be, traditions in the family, they can be kind of taught over time. This is the way you understand reality, what your reality is. And everybody's reality is a little bit different, hence why we have different beliefs about certain things. Going then into the very core of who you are your values, your morals, kind of your moral compass, we'll just say it like that. This is your long-lasting ideal that guides your behavior, so your judgment overall of what is right and what is wrong. It's very, very difficult for someone to try to influence your values once they've been established as you grow up. Your beliefs can change. Usually through mutual influence and through your own understandings, you can change your beliefs. Your attitudes can change pretty easily, whether that be through exposure to new experiences or new people, or even just influence of other individuals. James made a model of communication and self-concept, which I kind of recreated on the slide for you guys, and I'll just break down what it all means. So starting out, you have, your self-concept. Remember, this is the self-image and self-esteem put together. Your attitudes, beliefs, your values. This links directly into your own behaviors, how you act. Your behavior elicits a response from other individuals, so they'll respond to your behavior in some way. However, your perception of an individual's response may be interpreted differently than they actually intended. So you may think somebody's reacting to something that you said or did in an unfavorable way, wherein maybe they're just confused, and their response was confusion, not distaste. But we don't always know that. So everything affects the other, and it continues over and over again, because our perception of what other people think of us can influence our self-concept.
So this is kind of like a vicious circle, that everything affects another thing. So, people's opinion of you affects your self-concept. Your self-concept affects your behavior. Your behavior affects how people respond to you. How people respond to you changes your perception of how they respond to you. Keeps going around and around and around. So you have to be very mindful of yourself and kind of how your behavior can influence how people react to you and how that can change your self-concept. If you understand that it's a continuous cycle, you have the ability to break it if it's a negative cycle. Alright, so then the book talks about the different views of yourself. So you have the notion of the self-fulfilling prophecy, which might be something you've heard of before, and this is actually pretty common. And then the notion of face work and impression management. So the first being a self-fulfilling prophecy. This is kind of the idea that if you expect something to happen, chances are greater that's how it will happen. So, an example, if you go into an exam, like let's say a math exam, because I hate math, no offense. Let's say you're going into a math exam, and even though you studied, you're like, oh my god, this is going to be awful, I'm going to fail, I just know I'm going to fail. And even though you tried, you failed, or you got a D. You could have been setting yourself up for failure through a self-fulfilling prophecy. So you'd already resigned yourself to the idea that you weren't going to do well. So even if you thought you tried your hardest, perhaps while you were reading over the questions, you're like, I don't know, C looks good, great. I don't know, this is awful, this is going horribly, I'm totally failing this. Well, if the whole time you're saying that, then the outcome may be more likely. It's also, on the opposite side of this, the power of positive thinking. People talk about this and some people are like, oh, that's so stupid. No, actually, this has some value. So saying to yourself, okay, I can do this, I'm going to do great at this job interview, they'd be lucky to have me in this company, I know what I'm talking about, I'm good at what I do, I'm just going to do it, and we'll see what happens, hope for the best. So you go into the interview with a bit more confidence than you would if you're like, I'm not going to get hired. There's no way that they're going to pick me up for this job. You can set yourself up for success or failure this way. Next is impression management. So this is creating a more positive image of yourself. This is known as face work. So you show a certain face, not literal, but the way you kind of portray yourself to different people. And face work is kind of the verbal and nonverbal ways you try to maintain a good presence, the way you try to put together a positive or a good face for the public. So an example of this, let's say you just went through some financial or familial hardships, or you just got out of a big relationship and you're very depressed about it. However, you just started a new job where you don't really know anybody. So even though you're pretty depressed, you're pretty sad, you're maybe angry, broken up about it, when you go to work, you still have to smile, especially if you work in customer service. You have to kind of put on the brave face and show people some sense of normalcy, some standard of behavior. You can't walk around your new job like, woe is me, I'm so sad, and cry in the middle of an office meeting. You're not going to do that. You're going to put on a face, like if you're not going to share your personal life with people, they don't need to know that you're really, really upset about something. They just need to know that you're going to do your job well and that you're going to work with other people well. So you'll put on the face of everything's fine. The same thing can happen in face work if you're really, really excited about something and you're trying to contain your excitement to not maybe be overly showy to people that didn't get a promotion and you did. You want to be happy and gracious and thankful, but you don't want to rub it in other people's faces. So you use face work to kind of maintain your composure. We do this all the time with different groups of people. There's nothing wrong with that. Alright, so I talked about how culture and gender is a big influence on your self-concept. First part, culture. You come from maybe two different types of cultures. So we have the individualist culture and a collectivist culture. And they are kind of what they sound like. In individualist culture, individuals are really responsible for themselves and their immediate family at the most. A lot of it is about your own personal successes, how you're climbing the social ladder, the intellectual ladder, maybe the career ladder, how well you do, what your personal successes are, that contributes to your self-concept. So American culture is an individualist culture where we do promote personal success, and everybody is an individual, so you should all try to be your best self and to accomplish things for you and for your family, but your immediate family. It's less of a community focus and more of the focus on the individual importance. A collectivist culture is the opposite. This is where you are considered responsible for your entire cultural group. So you're more of a piece of a bigger puzzle, a representative of an idea that's much larger than just you. So a lot of Eastern cultures are collectivist cultures. This is measured by your contribution to the achievements of the group as a whole. So even if you're doing well, if the rest of your cultural group that you assign yourself to or that you would identify with is not doing well, that does reflect back onto you. So it's not just the individual success and focus, it's how does this affect the whole community? How does this benefit the whole community? There's not one culture that's better than another. Some work well in certain places and others work better in others. That's why, an individualist culture tends to work in America, but in Eastern countries, say, a good example is actually China. They have a collectivist culture. That works well there. So there is no one's a better option than the other. It depends on what culture you assign to. Now, the problem is when you do cross-culture things. So if you're from a collectivist culture and you end up immersing yourself in an individualist culture, you have to kind of rework and relearn how society functions. So that can be a change in your self-concept. Next is gender. The whole notion of men are from Mars and women are from Venus. Our self-concept is very different and it's influenced by gender, certainly. And we'll talk about gender and culture in many of the chapters, so kind of get used to hearing about them and how they're influenced through each of the topics that we talk about. So sex versus gender is the first thing I need to identify with you guys. There's a difference between your sex and your gender. Sex is biological. This is when you're born, you're one of a few things. You were born a male, you were born a female, or you were born a hermaphrodite, because that happens too. So you were either born with male parts, female parts, or both. That is your sex. Your gender is socially constructed. So your gender is not whether you're male or female. Your gender is masculine, feminine, or androgynous, or a mixture, which is what most people fall into. So gender stereotypes is kind of why we think male is masculine, all men must be masculine, all women must be feminine, and this is just really not the case. A lot of us are just androgynous. We fall kind of in the middle of that line between masculinity and femininity. For a gender stereotype, you would think the man is the one working for a living. They are the breadwinner, whereas the woman is the caregiver of the children in the home. That's a big gender stereotype. However, it does perpetuate itself. It does still exist, and for certain individuals, this works fine. It's a good structure. It's a fine setup of the way a family works. However, this is not standard throughout the world. It's definitely not. It is a stereotype. Gender expectations are similar to stereotypes in that men, an example, would rather go to a sporting event than an opera, whereas a woman would rather talk about emotions and feelings and just spend time cuddling together. That's a social construction of what we consider masculine and feminine, and we tend to assign them to genders. However, when we think of masculine and feminine clothing, it is now considered appropriate, obviously, in many cultures, for women to wear jeans, not dresses all the time, not skirts all the time. Jeans are or pants would be considered more masculine, but now it's more androgynous because it's accepted for both. Same thing now with color. When you think of a male color, you think of red or blue or even yellow. For female colors, you'll think of purple or pink or like pastel colors. However, I've seen men walk around in pink shirts. I've seen really masculine men walking around in pink shirts. Color doesn't really matter that much now. But there are still stereotypes and expectations that are assigned to these things. So, you will break gender stereotypes in many different ways. And that doesn't mean that you're a masculine woman or a feminine man. It means that most of us are just androgynous, that we have contributions from both. And that's normal. And then finally, the how-to of the chapter, how to kind of consider enhancing your own self-concept. And this is not one of those kumbaya moments. This is not that kind of class, really. But there are really good pieces of advice in the book that you should consider, because you're learning about how these things occur, how they build up, how they take place, how they change over time. But, you also need to know how to change something that you don't like about your communication patterns or yourself in this example, in this chapter. So the first is deciding exactly what you want to change about your self-concept. If you just say, oh, I hate myself, I want to be different, it's really broad. There are things about yourself that you're going to like, and there are things about yourself that you're not going to like. Figure out what it is exactly that you want to change or that you feel you have to change. It is specific. Is it part of your self-image? Is it a physical thing? Is it part of your self-concept? Is it an overall influence of your self-esteem? Commit to improving yourself. If you want to change something about yourself, you can't look at it like a crash diet. That's not how this is going to work. You have to commit to it. You have to really be into the notion of changing something about you so it's sustainable in the long run. Describe why you feel like you do. Why do you dislike some part of your self-concept? Why are there pieces of your self-esteem that are really low? What caused that? What influenced that? Is it something from childhood? Is it something from adulthood? Is it a failure that you experienced when you were younger? Or is it just not knowing? The unknown scares us. Decide to act to change feelings. It's a conscious effort to work on your self-concept, and that means to work on your self-image and your self-esteem. So if there's something, intellectually that you want to change about yourself, you got to start reading, or you got to start doing. If it's something physical about yourself, if you're uncomfortable with your weight, like I make a lot of weight jokes, and there's a purpose for that. There's a reason. I have self-image issues. If I want to change that, I have to, work on it. I have to diet. Or do my hair nicer than it is. Something. But you have to commit to it. Set ideal goals. Things that are going to be realistic, though. If you're saying, oh, I hate everything about myself, I want to change everything. That's a big undertaking. Start small. Start with things that are easy to change, things that are easy to update or to alter about yourself that are going to improve you. And then associate with supportive people. This actually is the most important piece of information aside from setting goals that I can give you. You fall into that cycle of self-concept that I talked about earlier in the chapter, we fall into this all the time, that we react to our perceptions of what other people think about us. So then that affects our self-concept, which affects the way we behave around others, which affects how others react to us, and it keeps going. So if you are associating with more supportive individuals or more positive individuals that, their flaws are not fatal, that they are genuine individuals that care about you, that you care about, they're good people, it changes. It's going to change how your self-concept is influenced. However, if you're around abusive individuals, whether that be physical, verbal, emotional, or otherwise, that is detrimental to your self-concept, and it'll continue that way. So think about the company you keep. You're only as happy as the company you keep a lot of times. Not in every situation, but for many of us, the influence of others is much greater than we think it is, than we assume that it is. So if anything, start there. Start with what you can change, and that is the company you keep. So I hope that gives you a good kind of indication of the chapter. Please skim over the chapter from the textbook, and we will, like I said, do the Who Are You activity in class. How do you promote who you are, who your image is, to the world? And a good way to think about this is social media. So Facebook, if you have it, or Twitter, or Tumblr, or, I don't know, Pinterest, things that you share with people through an electronic format. How do you, portray yourself? Think about a dating website if you've ever used those. You are setting up who you are for other people to look at. What do we change? What do we promote that's the best face of ourselves? Think about that, and we'll talk about that in class. I hope you guys have a good rest of your evening. If you watch the Super Bowl, sweet. I'm going to be pigging out on junk food, so I'm sure I'll be nice and lazy in class tomorrow. But I'll see you guys tomorrow night. Please, if you have any questions, send me an email through Blackboard or through Nova's website, and I'll see you soon. So.